native weeds for 20 butterflies. And if you heard about this presentation a couple of weeks ago, you might remember it was 10 native weeds for 19 butterflies. But in the last few days of my preparing for the presentation, I was able to find a 20th butterfly species that relies on one of these 10 native weeds that I'll be talking about. So now we've got two nice round numbers, 10 native weeds for 20 butterflies. A little bit about me and why I'm giving this presentation. I'm currently serving as the president of the Naples Chapter of the Florida Native Plant Society, and I've been involved with the Naples chapter for the last 8 years or so. I was formally trained as an environmental scientist, and I've been employed as an environmental educator at 2 different conservation-based organizations in Southwest Florida, where I grew up and where I still live. So those 2 organizations, most recently Naples Botanical Garden, and previously 6 Mile Cypress Slough Preserve and Fort Myers. So I've had lots of opportunities to talk to people from all different age groups about native plants, both in their natural habitats and in garden settings. I am also an active member of the North American Butterfly Association. I volunteer with my local Miami Blue chapter, and I've participated in over a dozen butterfly counts over the last several years in different natural areas in South Florida. So this presentation today is a chance for me to talk about my 2 passions, native plants and butterflies, all at the same time. So that's a little bit about where I'm coming from. Now let's take a look at where we're going today for this presentation. Here is a brief outline of what I'll be covering. I will introduce what may seem like a strange concept of native weeds. So I'll define what I mean by native weeds and give you 10 different examples. We will touch on butterfly conservation and review the butterfly life cycle and why native plants are important to the life cycles of butterflies. Then I will share profiles and photos of 10 native weeds that provide for 20 different native butterflies. Then towards the end, I'll touch on low maintenance lawns and what you can do at home to help promote butterfly conservation. So again, why this talk specifically? Why focus on native weeds for butterflies and not talk about the more traditional butterfly gardening? Well, really this presentation is giving us a chance to really open our minds, if you will, and think differently about some of the plants that we may have called weeds for a very long time. And because we'll be focusing on some weedy native plants, it'll give us a chance to highlight some of the lesser known butterflies that rely on these weedy native plants, and also give us a different way to facilitate butterfly conservation at home by allowing certain weedy natives to have a place in your home landscape if possible. And of course, many people, if they don't absolutely love butterflies, they at least like butterflies. And I'm sure a lot of people who have joined today have a big place in their heart for butterflies. And because of our desire to attract butterflies to our yards and home landscapes, it drives us to create butterfly gardens to attract the butterflies. And the more time we spend around the butterflies observing them, the more we understand the needs of the butterflies, how they need native plants. After all, butterfly gardening is a great gateway into native landscaping. But people also start to understand the needs of butterflies in their natural habitats as well. And through this presentation, you'll see that yes, we can create butterfly gardens to attract butterflies, but many of our yards can be natural habitats for butterflies as well, as long as we allow certain native plants to persist there. Okay, so we've already mentioned native plants quite a lot, and I'm sure lots of people attending are familiar with the native plants in their areas. But just in case, let's go ahead and define what is a native plant in the first place. According to the Florida Native Plant Society, a native plant is a species that occurred within Florida's boundaries prior to European contact. So we're thinking all the way back to the late 1400s, and the plants that were present on the natural lands of Florida at that time. Another way to think about what is a native plant, they're the plants that are present in our natural habitats, natural ecosystems, and they have integral functions within those ecosystems. So in the photo here, you can see an example of a pine flatwoods with saw palmetto understory. That is one of the major ecosystems in my part of Florida. And Florida, botanically, is quite a diverse state. We have over 3,300 species of native plants in Florida, and roughly one-third of them are grown in cultivation, particularly by native plant nurseries. And I came up with that estimate by doing a quick database search in the Florida Association of Native Nurseries. So, to look at it from the other way, that means about two-thirds of our native plants we might not be able to purchase at this time for native landscaping, but we can see them in their natural associations and ecosystems, and they might be growing naturally on our home properties as well. So, the total extreme from the other end of native plants, we have non native invasive plants. So, non native plants did not naturally occur in Florida, and usually they were introduced by people in one way or another. And non native plants that have negative impacts on ecosystems where they can completely take over, those get classified as invasive plants. So the photo here is of Brazilian pepper. This is one of the major problem invasive plants in Southwest Florida and probably throughout a lot of the state. So today, I won't be focusing on any non-native plants. I'll be focusing on native plants that have some weedy characteristics. But learning about invasive plants is very important. So if you do want to learn more about them, I recommend the Center for Aquatic and Invasive Plants through the University of Florida. You can see at the bottom left of this slide, there's a link for that resource. And I'd like everybody to know that I will provide a PDF version of these slides on the Naples chapter's website shortly after the presentation concludes today. So you could download the slides and click on all of the resource links that you want. Okay, so we've talked about what's a native plant, what's a non-native invasive plant, and then we have this other term of weedy plants, or what do we mean when we say a plant is a weed? Well, generally, a weed is any plant that's not valued where it's growing, and it can actually be a non-native plant or a native plant, which could be news to some people. And generally, a weed is a plant that shows up uninvited in our gardens or on our properties. And a lot of the time, we have the urge to remove the weedy plant because we didn't put it there in the first place. However, as I mentioned, some weedy plants are indeed native to Florida. So they have their place in Florida's natural habitats, and they may be adjacent to human communities. And these different native plants that have a weedy sort of outlook, as far as we're concerned, they share certain characteristics that allow them to thrive in disturbed or dynamic conditions. So they're really great survivors, in other words. So we might see some weedy native plants on roadsides, trail edges, and vacant lots, or they might already be in our yards. All of the photos on this slide are different native plants that could be considered weedy, and they're all in my yard right now. What are those characteristics that might make a native plant be considered weedy? Well, they tend to have a high germination rate. That means that the chances are really good that if a seed hits the soil, it's going to become a seedling. These plants are usually quick to bloom and set seeds. So that means it doesn't take a lot of time. They don't need to mature and grow really big before they start to bloom and create seeds to reproduce. They tend to create large numbers of seeds and have effective means of seed dispersal. The example we're looking at here, these seeds should look pretty familiar to lots of people. They are the seeds of Spanish needles, which is one of our weedy wildflowers. And these two-pronged seeds tend to stick really well to our socks and clothing, but also to animal fur. So they might get stuck on us while we're gardening and we walk around a little bit, then we notice we have these seeds all over us. And if you're like me, you pick them off individually. And if you're tired, you might just drop them on the ground. And then there's going to be your next generation of Spanish needles. So that's an example of some effective seed dispersal. Taken all together, these different characteristics that some of the weedy natives have, it allows them to adapt and thrive in conditions of disturbance. And this might mean to us that these plants spread a little more aggressively than we would like in our gardens. But imagine for a moment that you are a butterfly. And from the butterfly's perspective, these characteristics could be taken as persistence and dependability. And if you're looking at a plant that you need as your host plant, that you need for your reproduction, that could be looking pretty good to you. Because let's bring it back to the butterflies. What does all this have to do with butterflies again, talking about weedy plants? Remember, some of our lawn weeds are actually native host plants for butterflies. So that brings us to a quick review of the butterfly life cycle, making sure that we know the different ways that butterflies need native plants throughout their lives. And let's start with the egg. You can see in the photo here, there are some small yellow flecks on top of some of the leaves in the middle of the photo. Those are butterfly eggs. This happens to be from one of the sulfur butterflies, but this just gives you an idea of the small scale that we're talking about. If you're going to be searching for butterfly eggs, they are very small little creations. And of course, it's not going to be an adult butterfly that hatches from that tiny egg, but it will be a tiny caterpillar. And when the caterpillars are small, they tend to stay together in groups and they eat on the newer growth of the plant, sometimes even the flower buds or immature seed pods. The caterpillars eat and shed their skin multiple times as they grow. And by the time the caterpillar is larger and it's eaten enough, it will shed its skin one final time to reveal the chrysalis. And if you haven't ever looked at a fast-paced video showing the transformation from a caterpillar to a chrysalis, I highly encourage you to look up such a video after the presentation is over. It's really something to see. So while the caterpillar could be mobile and eat the leaves of its host plant, as the chrysalis, it's basically glued in one place. So it uses camouflage as its only means of surviving to the next phase. So lots of chrysalids have an appearance something like this, like a dried old dead leaf hanging off of a branch. But after all of the changes have finished happening inside the chrysalis, it will be the adult winged butterfly that emerges. The example we're seeing here is for Florida's state butterfly, the zebra heliconian, also known as the zebra longwing. And one of the plants that they'll need pretty soon is going to be a nectar plant where they can sip nectar to fuel their flight and other daily activities. But not too long after, the butterfly, if it's a female, is going to seek out its host plant as well so that it can lay eggs and start the cycle over again. The example we're seeing here is the most common passion vine in my part of Florida, in Southwest Florida, the corky stem passion vine, which is the host for the zebra longwing. Okay, so remember, there's these two main types of plants that butterflies need to complete their life cycle: host plants for reproduction and nectar plants to provide energy and calories for the adult butterfly. And just to drive the point home a little bit more, the host plant is the one that will have eggs on it and it will have caterpillars chewing on it. The example that most people know is that monarchs need milkweeds for their host plants. And so you expect to have caterpillars chewing on your milkweeds. The other type of plant, again, is the nectar plant. So this one is just for the adult butterflies. They're going to be flowering plants that provide nectar. So sometimes the host plant can be used for nectar as well, but in general, butterflies are more specific about what their host plant is than what their nectar plant is. So speaking to that, as I move through the list of 10 native weeds and the butterflies that need them, you'll notice that some butterflies appear only once associated with one type of plant. Other butterflies are going to appear multiple times associated with different plants. And that's because some butterflies are real specialists when it comes to their host plant, like the monarchs needing milkweed. They'll only use one or a few closely related host plant species for their reproduction. And then on the other side, we have some butterflies are generalists when it comes to their host plants, which means that they're not as picky. They can lay their eggs on distantly related plants, even if they're in different families, and still have the caterpillars survive to complete the life cycle. And the example shown here is the gray hair streak is going to come up multiple times as we move through the plant list. I also wanted to share with you what qualifiers I used when I was putting together my list of 10 native weeds for 20 butterflies. So the first type of native weed are plants with the word weed in the common name, but they're already accepted as a desirable plant and a desirable host plant for butterflies. So the example there, of course, is milkweed. People have generally accepted that they want milkweeds in their gardens so they can provide for monarchs. So that's a way to sort of ease us into thinking about desiring some native weeds in our landscape. The other type of native weed are ones that they're native plants, but they're often considered lawn weeds, and they're really not widely known as native plants or as butterfly host plants. So you'll see that second type of native weed towards the second half of the plant profiles. Okay, so let's get into it. This is the quick list of 10 native weeds for 20 butterflies. I will share their individual profiles in just a moment. I did want to mention again that I'm based in Southwest Florida, so there is a little bit of bias in my plant list towards what I'm familiar with here in Southwest Florida. But I will be showing range maps for the different plants so you can see if they occur in your part of Florida. And I'll also mention if there's multiple species throughout the state. So even if the plant that I'm showing in the pictures doesn't occur where you live, there's probably a relative that does occur closer to your area. Okay, so let's get started with the first plant, this first native weed. Got to start off with the milkweed. This one that I picked is the pink swamp milkweed. You can see in the range map at the top left that it does occur scattered throughout most of peninsular Florida. There are 21 native species of milkweed, so every part of the state is going to be represented by at least one kind of milkweed. And because they are widespread throughout the state, you can find them in a variety of habitats. They are very attractive to pollinators in general, not just butterflies, but also a variety of bees. And really, I think everybody has heard by now that monarchs need milkweeds as their host plant, but there are a couple other butterflies that use milkweed as their host plant too. One of those is the queen that I'll share with you in just a moment, but also the soldier butterfly, which is more of a South Florida specialty butterfly. So here's the monarch in case there's anyone who hasn't seen a monarch before. I'm sure everybody has. It's a very recognizable bright orange butterfly with black borders and white spots. And if you're going to be looking for monarch eggs on your milkweed, you'll be looking for white eggs that are laid individually or singly underneath the leaves or on the flowers. And I would like to point out one of the resources that I use to share this information about eggs as well as the caterpillars comes from the book Florida Butterfly Caterpillars and Their Host Plants by Minnow, Butler, and Hall. And I'll show you that resource at the end of the presentation. If you're going to be looking for monarch caterpillars on your milkweeds, you're going to look for a caterpillar with yellow, white, and black stripes and 2 pairs of black filaments. So the monarch caterpillar has 1 pair towards the head end and a 2nd pair towards the rear end. So remember these 2 pairs of filaments for the monarch caterpillar. And we'll be contrasting that with the queen caterpillar in just a moment. Many people are also aware that when the monarch caterpillars eat the milkweed, they're acquiring a toxin from the plant that helps protect them through the rest of their life, even when they are in the butterfly phase. This one is the queen butterfly. It's a close relative of the monarch and looks a lot like the monarch, but the coloring is a bit different. It's more of a chestnut brown for its overall color. Similar appearing eggs and places to look for the eggs for the queen butterfly, but there is a difference in the caterpillar. So for the queen caterpillar, you'll be seeing 3 pairs of the black filaments. So here's 1 towards the back, a 2nd pair, and a 3rd pair of those black filaments. So that's how you can tell if it's a queen caterpillar or a monarch caterpillar that would have just 2 pairs of filaments. If you're familiar with milkweed flowers and you're looking at this close-up photo, you can tell how small this caterpillar is. Of course, it's not done growing yet, but this photo gives you an idea of how small the caterpillars might be when you're looking for them and where they might be hiding or taking a rest during the day. Here is our next native weed that we're going to talk about, the blue porterweed. This one is quite common in native landscaping in Southwest Florida. You can see that it's a low-growing plant that produces these long flower spikes that make small purple flowers. They're quite popular with pollinators overall, but many people do not know that the blue porterweed is also a butterfly host plant, particularly for the tropical buckeye butterfly. And you may be thinking, oh, I know buckeye butterflies. And you are correct. There are common buckeye butterflies found throughout the state of Florida. The tropical buckeye, though, is really an extreme South Florida specialty. And the way to know that you've got a tropical buckeye is to take a look underneath the hind wing. There's this light colored line that runs through the hind wing. And that is diagnostic for the tropical buckeye and something that we don't see on the common buckeye. So if you're in South Florida and you're going to be planting blue porterweed and you have a chance to attract the tropical buckeye, you'll be looking for green colored eggs on the leaves or black and spiny caterpillars to give you a hint that the tropical buckeye is nearby. Here's our next native weed, and one that is often considered as a lawn weed. That's the turkey tangle fogfruit, or Phylla nodiflora. This one is one of those that it does spread quite readily through the lawn. It can handle any mowing and some foot traffic. But if you take a look at the flower much closer, like the close up towards the bottom right of the main photo, the flower head is this dark purple shaped like the top of a matchstick, and it's ringed by these small white and pink flowers that, even though they're small, they are very attractive to a variety of butterflies and other pollinators seeking nectar. And also, the turkey tangle fog fruit, even though it's hard to see all of its leaves in this picture mixed in with the turf grass, it's also a host plant for the white peacock and the Phaon crescent, and sometimes the common buckeye. If you are not sure about incorporating turkey tangle fog fruit throughout the entirety of your lawn, I wanted to share this picture as a little inspiration, as something a little different you could do. You could create a turkey tangle patch, as I like to call it. So you have a certain area of your lawn that you plant the turkey tangle fog fruit and let it spread. And then this makes it a really easy way to look for butterflies and eggs and caterpillars because they'll be collected pretty much in one place. So here is the white peacock, one of the butterflies that uses turkey tangle fog fruit as its host plant. You can see this one's a medium-sized butterfly, mostly white in color, but it has a nice orangish tan border around the wings, as well as some small black eye spots. The white peacock can be found throughout peninsular Florida. If you're going to be looking for the eggs, they are green in color, laid one at a time. The caterpillars are black with orange spines, and they tend to hide near the ground during the day. So you might need to look underneath the turkey tangle fog fruit. And there is a second host plant that is used by the white peacock besides the turkey tangle fog fruit, is herb of grace, or Bacopa monnieri, that tends to occur in more wet habitats. Now this one is the Phaon crescent, the other butterfly that regularly uses turkey tangle fog fruit as its host plant. This one is a much smaller butterfly. I would say at least less than half the size of the white peacock. It is a beautiful little orange butterfly though. So the crescents are the type of butterfly that you might not really get to appreciate unless you have some binoculars or a zoom lens on your camera. So then you can see the different colors and patterns on the wings of these butterflies. For the Phaon crescent, it tends to have this lighter yellow to cream colored band running across the two forewings. And this is a butterfly that occurs across the whole state of Florida. So no matter where you live, you'll probably see a crescent not too far away. The eggs for this one are greenish yellow, and they're typically laid in clusters underneath the leaves. And if you're looking for the caterpillars, they are small and brown with pale stripes. And it's important to note that the size of the caterpillar is going to be relative to the size of the butterfly. So knowing that the Phaon crescent is a smaller butterfly means you should expect to look for smaller caterpillars. And an interesting behavior for the Phaon crescent caterpillars is they may feed in groups within a silk nest that they sort of spin around themselves. So if you see a silk nest among the turkey tangle fog fruit, it could be caterpillars of the Phaon crescent. Our next native weed is the Virginia pepperweed. This one is blooming beautifully in my yard right now. You may have also heard of this plant as poor man's pepper because the seeds can be used as a black pepper substitute, and it is in the mustard family. You can see the shape of the inflorescences taken together. It's a sort of bottle brush shape, and the delicate white flowers that bloom towards the top of the inflorescence. The Virginia pepperweed is a host plant for both the checkered white and the great southern white. And I'll share with you a little introduction to the great southern white. This one is another medium-sized butterfly, so comparable in size to the white peacock that we saw a little bit earlier. Of course, being called the Great Southern White, it is mostly a white butterfly. It has some black edging around the forewings, but really the standout feature for the Great Southern White are those turquoise ends to the antennae. It's really neat seeing that in person, and if you get a photograph like this of the Great Southern White, you get to really appreciate that really interesting color on the antennae. You can see the Great Southern White across Central and South Florida. It tends to be more coastal as you move further north in Florida. If you're going to be looking for the eggs on the Virginia pepperweed, they are slender and pale. They might be laid individually or in small groups. And if you're looking for the caterpillars, they will be green with yellow stripes and black spots. Moving on to our next native weed for butterflies. This one is the Florida pellitory. This one is in the nettle family or the Urticaceae. And in my experience with this plant, I don't believe it to be one of the stinging nettles, but you can see all those little hairs on the leaves in the close-up shot of this plant. So take precautions if you might be sensitive to the possibly stinging hairs. This plant blooms really inconspicuous green flowers in the leaf axils. And it is commonly encountered in moist, somewhat shady gardening situations in my part of Florida. And perhaps the most remarkable thing about the Florida pellitory is I didn't know at first, it is one of the host plants for the red admiral butterfly. This is a very striking butterfly, roughly the same size as the white peacock and the great southern white. It's mostly a black butterfly with reddish orange bands and some white spots. At least down here in South Florida, I don't see it very often. It's sort of might be patchy in its distribution, or it just shows up once in a while. But it's always a treat to get to see the red admiral. Its eggs are pale green, tend to be laid on top of the leaves, and the caterpillars are spiny and dark colored with yellow or white markings. Something distinctive to look for that might give you a hint that the red admiral has been around is that the caterpillars tend to make shelters by tying the leaves together with silk. And the red admiral will use a couple of other host plants in the nettle family, including the false nettle and the heartleaf nettle. Next up, we have the hairy pod cowpea or Vigna luteola. This one is a vine that is found throughout a lot of Florida. If you're familiar with plants in the pea family, you'll recognize the characteristic shape of the yellow flower with the big banner petal, and as well as the development of some green pea pods. The hairy pod cowpea happens to be the host for quite a collection of butterflies, including the Cassius blue, the Serranus blue, the gray hairstreak, and the long-tailed skipper. For this case, I'm going to introduce you to the Cassius blue. This is another very small butterfly, probably a little bit smaller than the Phaon crescent that we talked about earlier. If you get a close-up view of the Cassius blue, you can see it has some banding that is gray and white. And I wish I could explain why this particular butterfly is perched on top of the seeds of Spanish needles. It really doesn't look comfortable, but that's what it was doing at the time. The Cassius blue can be found across peninsular Florida. If you're going to be looking for its eggs, they are flat and pale green, tend to be laid on the flower buds rather than the leaves. The caterpillars are small, as can be expected because of the small size of the butterfly. And the caterpillars are described as slug-like, which basically means they don't have a very obvious and distinct head. It's just going to look like a similar shape to a slug, like a miniature garden slug. And the caterpillars can appear in variable colors. And with the eggs being laid on the flower buds, it is common for the caterpillars to eat the flower buds as well as immature seeds. Our next native weed is really quite a collection of them. The trefoils, or Desmodium, is the genus. There are 19 different native species of trefoils throughout Florida. And the one that I'm showing in the photo here is Desmodium paniculatum. So they have small pinkish purple flowers. And what is really most distinctive and what made me recognize this plant is the fact that the seeds are like stick tights. That's what we always called them when I was growing up. They would stick right onto your pant legs like they were made out of Velcro. So perhaps that's how you know this plant as well. Again, you can find different species throughout the state, and generally they are hosts for, again, the gray hair streak, the long-tailed skipper, and the Durante's longtail. I'll introduce you to the long-tailed skipper. This is one that you can see across the state. As far as skippers go, it's a relatively large one, mostly brown in color. You can see it does have two long tails, although the tails can go missing if there's been an encounter with a predator. You can see the photo at the bottom that's showing off the turquoise shimmery top to the long-tailed skipper. That one happens to be missing its tails, so you might see them with or without their tails. And many people wonder about skippers, if they are butterflies or if they're moths, and the consensus is that they do belong in the butterfly group, so skippers are considered butterflies. If you have the desmodiums or some other native peas in your yard, you might be looking for the eggs of this species. They are pale yellow. They can be laid individually or in short stacks like pancakes, one on top of the other. The caterpillars are green with a yellow stripe, and they have a very distinct brown head. And if you're going to be looking for evidence of caterpillars, they also make shelters in the leaves, either by tearing little pieces of the leaves and folding them over, or using entire pieces of leaves and folding them in half. If you've heard about the bean leaf roller, this is that same caterpillar. Sometimes it's considered a pest in vegetable gardens that are trying to grow peas and beans. But again, if you have native representatives of from the pea family in your yard, then at least there's half a chance that the long-tailed skipper will go for the native peas instead. Okay, this one is a very exciting one. The next native weed is the purple thistle. And with a name like that, Cirsium horridulum, it gives a certain first impression to this plant. But it is a short-lived native wildflower in the sunflower family. The flowers can be purple, like shown here. They can be lighter pink or white. And the same species is also called the yellow thistle. I personally haven't seen it with yellow flowers, but maybe some of you have in other parts of the state. The Purple thistle can get quite tall. This one, when I took the photo, was well over my head. But the purple thistle flowers are very popular nectar plants, as the tiger swallowtail is demonstrating here. And if you are going to get up close and personal with the thistles, the purple thistle in particular, please know it's a very spiny plant. It has a lot of spines on every corner of its leaves, really. And I was surprised when I first learned that this sort of intimidating spiny plant was the host plant for one of our smallest butterflies, the little meadowlark, which I'll introduce you to on the next slide. But it's also one of the hosts of the more generalist species, the painted lady. So this one is the little meadowlark, and it's a real treat if you ever get to see this butterfly. It is found across the state of Florida. It is very small, even smaller than the crescents. I remember photographing a little meadowlark, and suddenly one of the crescents came into view, and it looked like a giant compared to the little meadowlark. So this is truly a very small butterfly. But when you can see it up close, it has this beautiful orange color and really shimmery, iridescent blue streaks running through it. So it's really a treat to see this one. If you are going to inspect purple thistles for eggs of the little meadowlark, you'll be looking for flat brown eggs that are laid underneath the leaves. And the appearance of the caterpillar is also surprising. It's whitish green in color with very long white hairs. So again, not what I would expect would turn into this very beautiful little gem of a butterfly, but that's the way its natural history goes. Another good clue to see if the thistle is being chewed by little meadowlark caterpillars is that you'll see these small round windows in the leaves, and that's because the caterpillars tend to eat the leaf from the underside, and they leave the top cuticle intact on the top part of the leaf. Okay, here is our second to last native weed for butterflies. This is one that I have all throughout my yard at the moment. It is common fan petals. The genus is Sida, and there are 5 native species throughout Florida. If you look at the yellow flower closely, you might see a little resemblance to a hibiscus flower, and that would make sense because it's in the same family, the family Malvaceae, also known as the mallow family. And this one in particular is the host for, again, the gray hair streak, a more generalist butterfly, as well as the more specialist mallow scrub hair streak that I'll show you in just a moment, as well as a few different species of checkered skippers. This one is the mallow scrub hair streak that uses the common fan petals as one of its host plants. I have a special place in my heart for the hair streak butterflies. They are very small, like the blues, like the Cassius blue we looked at earlier, and they're closely related to the blues as well. This one is a small gray butterfly with some black spots and a more distinct orange rimmed black spot towards the back of the hind wing in line with these 2 little tails. And that's where they get their name, hair streaks. They have these thin hair-like tails. And hair streaks have a really interesting behavior that they will shuffle their hind wings back and forth to move those tails and draw attention to what is thought to be a false eye spot towards the back of their hind wing, so that a predator like a lizard might get distracted and go for the back end of the butterfly instead of the front end, leaving the hair streak to live another day. This one is found along coastal areas of South Florida. Its eggs are white and tend to be laid on the flower buds. The caterpillars are similar looking to the blues, with the more slug-like appearance without the distinct head, and variable colors, red or green. And Another host plant that is also in the hibiscus family that may be growing in your yard is sleepy morning, or Waltheria indica, is also used by this butterfly. Okay, last but not least, the native weed for butterflies is the Spanish needles, or Biden's alba. And I know this one can be the bane of the existence of many gardeners, especially in my part of Florida. It spreads rather aggressively, and it has those two-pronged needle-like seeds that get stuck to our clothes and stuck to our pets. But this is one of the most important nectar plants for pollinators in Florida. I personally have photos of 12 to 15 different kinds of butterflies all nectaring on Spanish needles. But not only that, it is also a host plant for the dainty sulfur butterfly. And this is the one that actually first inspired me to put this presentation together. Here's the dainty sulfur. It is rather small as far as the sulfur butterflies go. It is mostly yellow in color. It has these black spots on the underside of the forewing that help you identify it. And this one's found across peninsular Florida, should be pretty familiar to a lot of you. Its eggs are slender and yellow, and they tend to prefer laying their eggs on very small seedlings of the Spanish needles. So perhaps even before you recognize that the seedling is going to be Spanish needles, the dainty sulfur is laying its eggs on it. And I have seen that in person. The caterpillars are green with a purple stripe, and they tend to rest on the stems of the Spanish needles while they're not feeding. And you can see the coloration of the stem is pretty similar to a green and purple combination. So the caterpillars camouflage quite well on their host plant. And just to hit it on home that how important the Spanish needles is. You can see its popularity in this photo. There's a couple of bees going for it, as well as the queen butterfly getting some nectar from the Spanish needles. And I found this quote from Roger Hammer, who has published a series of Florida wildflower guides for us. The Spanish needles is a weed worth growing. So keep that in mind. Okay, so we've gone through our profiles of the 10 native weeds for 20 butterflies. And I just wanted to touch on the topic of sustainable lawns or low maintenance lawns, because if you maintain your lawn in this sort of way, you are more likely to have these weedy native plants be present, and then they can provide the resources that all these different butterflies need. So lawns with less maintenance often have higher ground cover diversity because they're free from herbicides that are extinguishing different weeds in the lawn. They're free from pesticides that might be eliminating some of the insects in the area. They're free from excessive irrigation and fertilizers. And if you're going after a lower maintenance schedule for your lawn, you tend to mow less frequently and mow at a higher height that will allow some of the different ground covers to bloom and set seed and reproduce. Of course, there is still the need to monitor and remove any non-native invasive plants that may be appearing, but overall, allowing a diversity of natives to be present. Here's a little bit more of a close-up view of, this is my lawn at the moment. Of course, we've got the sunshine mimosa. You can see that pink puffball flower in the front. This one I didn't put on the list of native weeds because even though it is a host plant for the little yellow butterfly, it's really accepted as a ground cover that you can purchase in my area at least. But we can also see we have some seedlings of the Spanish needles coming up. And if we look even closer, we also have the turkey tangle fog fruit moving through as another ground cover. And you can see some evidence of something that's been chewing on the turkey tangle as well. So overall, keep in mind the greater plant diversity you have, even in your lawn, is going to lead to greater wildlife diversity, specifically for butterflies for our focus today. So the thought may have come to your mind, if you have all these native weeds in your yard, will all 20 of the butterflies show up? And the answer to that is it depends. It depends if the natural range of the butterfly overlaps with where you live. So, for many of the butterflies that were found throughout the state of Florida, if you have all of those native host plants for them, the butterflies very well could show up. But on the other hand, if we're thinking about a butterfly that's more of an extreme South Florida specialist, like the tropical buckeye, even if you plant the blue porterweed, its host plant, let's say you live in North Florida or far west in the Panhandle, um, it's less likely that the tropical buckeye will show up because it's just too far away from its normal range of where it exists. Okay, so what else can you do to promote butterfly conservation on your home landscapes? Hopefully now you're, accepting that some of those native weeds, perhaps you've seen them in your yard, and perhaps you can give at least a small back corner of your yard to increase the ground cover diversity there. I know everybody lives in all different kinds of communities with different landscaping rules. Um, but something that is great for everybody to do is talk to your neighbors and your friends. Share a little something that you learned today. Let them know, hey, did you know that one plant we thought was a weed? It's really a native butterfly host plant. If you'd like to get more involved, learn more about native plants, I highly encourage you to join your local chapter of the Florida Native Plant Society. And if you want to learn more about our butterflies, join your local chapter of the North American Butterfly Association. And I encourage you as well, spend some time in your yard or in your community in different natural areas and get familiar with the different weeds, both the native and the non-native, so you know which ones you might like to allow to persist in your landscape and those that would be better if they were removed. I also encourage you to consider limiting or ceasing use of herbicides and pesticides on your lawn as much as possible to promote some good ground cover diversity that will provide for butterflies, other pollinators, and other wildlife. There are lots of resources for us to learn more related to this topic. I promised I'd show you the book that was at my side the whole time I was working on this presentation. That's on the left, Florida Butterfly Caterpillars and Their Host Plants by Minnow, Butler, and Hall. And many of these books are available through the Florida Native Plant Society website in the resources section. It will link you to be able to purchase a great variety of books about native plants and some about butterflies as well. There's also, of course, a lot of online resources for learning more. Here's a collection of some of the plant websites that I look at almost every day. The main Florida Native Plant Society website, the Naples Chapter website, the Florida Plant Atlas. That was the place where I was able to share the range maps for the different plants, the Florida Wildflower Foundation, as well as the Institute for Regional Conservation, especially if you live in South Florida. And there's also plenty of online resources with a focus on butterflies. I provided links to the different butterfly species from the website of Butterflies and Moths of North America. That's a really great resource, as well as eButterfly. The Florida Museum of Natural History provides digital versions of different butterfly brochures. And if you're looking to join a local chapter to learn about butterflies, that would be through the North American Butterfly Association. And to learn any cutting edge research about butterflies or other Lepidoptera, including the moths, there's the McGuire Center for Lepidoptera at the University of Florida. All right, everybody, thank you so much for attending this presentation and for your attention. If you would like to reach out to me and ask any questions later on, our website is fnpsnaples.org and our email is naplesnativeplants@fnps.org. I will be happy to take any questions.
Okay, great. Thank you, Andee.
Of course.
I will pop my video back in so people can see me. We have a question from early on in the presentation from Jacqueline, who asks, how long do butterflies live?
That's a very good question. The length of time the butterfly lives, specifically as the adult butterfly, it does vary with the species of butterfly, as well as what part of the state or what part of the world you live in. South Florida, as an example, we rarely, if ever, get any freezes down where I live. So that tends to increase the lifespan of the butterfly. But you also have to take into account that they could be attacked by a predator at any time, a lizard or a bird. So generally, people say that butterflies live about a week, but it can be longer, it can be shorter.
And there's some overwintering that occurs in some species, correct?
That is correct. Again, since I live in South Florida, we see butterfly activity year round, really. But in other areas that get colder temperatures, butterflies can overwinter in different life phases. So they could overwinter as a caterpillar or as a chrysalis. And then, of course, we know about the migratory monarchs that overwinter as the butterfly phase.
Right. And there are other species of butterflies that are also migratory in addition to monarchs, although obviously the monarchs are the most epic.
Yes, that is correct. There are other kinds of butterflies that are migratory. The monarch is the most well known and well researched. And again, with me being in South Florida, a lot of our butterflies are resident, but we can see migrants passing through and kind of increasing our populations of different species.
Great. And could you talk about the filaments on butterflies and moths? So there was a comment in the chat from Beth who said that looks like a moth caterpillar because it has spines. And so people who are familiar with
Ah.
stinging moth caterpillars
Mhm.
might think that this is a uniquely moth characteristic.
Right. Yes, I have seen a variety of moth caterpillars as well that have the furry or hairy or long needles on them that make them look like, oh, I definitely don't want to touch that one. But overall, butterflies and moths are very closely related. They're in the same, I believe it's an order, the order Lepidoptera. So they're very closely related. And if you look at a family tree for moths and butterflies, the butterfly lineage is really nestled within the moth lineage. So they do have a lot of similar characteristics. The number of wings they have as an adult, the fact that they go through the caterpillar phase. One of the differences is that butterflies create the naked pupa or the chrysalis, versus a lot of moths will add an extra layer of material around their pupa, which is what we call a cocoon. So that's one of the differences between butterflies and moths in general.
And we didn't talk about skippers. We have a lot of grass skippers in Florida, some of which are threatened and endangered. And
Mm-hmm.
Beth brings up that skippers are believed by many entomologists to be the evolutionary link between moths and butterflies,
That's very interesting
which I
that the skippers could be, yes, the link between the moths and the butterflies. Yeah, there's still a lot of genetic research being done. And I mentioned the McGuire Center for Lepidoptera out of the University of Florida, and that's where a lot of that cutting edge research about their genetics and phylogenies comes from.
Definitely would like to read more research on butterflies and moths. I have not delved into it very
Yeah,
much.
it's fascinating.
Yes. So there's some discussion here about passion vine caterpillars. So we have the zebra
Mhm.
longwings, and then we have the Gulf fritillaries, and how you can touch them, but you may wish to maybe research the caterpillar and the host plant it's on and get an identification before touching it, because there are some caterpillars that are venomous.
Yes. So before you handle any wildlife, even a caterpillar, you want to know what you're dealing with. And there are a lot of caterpillars that have an appearance that they would, hurt you if you handled them because they have spines or hairs. Um, a lot of them have a spiny appearance, as I mentioned, for the different butterflies we introduced today. Um, so that's a very good tip. Don't touch something unless you know that it's safe to do so.
And we had some questions. We had a question from Ron. Are the white peacocks also found in the panhandle? So I dropped some links to butterfliesandmoths.org and their species
Great.
page, and then also the species page in iNaturalist. So you can look up the range for each individual species on the websites that Andee referenced, in case you're curious about whether these butterflies occur in your area.
Right. Resources like iNaturalist or eButterfly or even NABA, the North American Butterfly Association, they have recent sightings pages. So you can see, most recently where people have been seeing these different kinds of butterflies. And it is quite possible that their ranges are changing with time as our climate changes.
Right. We can see that with the Kunti butterfly, the Atala.
Yes, the Atala, that is for sure.
Corey asks, is there a list of native plant nurseries across Florida where we can purchase these plants? So I directed Corey to the Florida Association of Native Nurseries website.
Fabulous. That's what I would do.
And then also, depending on your local chapter, some local chapters are currently still doing contactless plant sales. So if you're having a hard time finding native plants, or your native plant nursery, you don't have one nearby, your local chapter might be running one of those. So have a look.
Yes.
Um, Ron asks, is lyre-leaf sage a good butterfly host plant?
As far as I know, the sages or the salvias do not serve as host plants for butterflies, but they are popular nectar plants. In my part of Florida, we see a lot of the scarlet sage, the Salvia coccinea, that's used in butterfly gardens a lot, and it's attractive to pollinators in general.
Great. Kathy asks, does the Atala butterfly use another plant other than the Kunti as a host plant?
This is a very good question. Uh, so the Kunti is our only native cycad in Florida, and there are many kinds of ornamental cycads that are used in landscaping or botanical collections throughout Florida. And there have been many observations of the Atala caterpillars eating other species of ornamental cycads. So the Kunti is the only native host plant, but that doesn't mean the Atala is not laying eggs on ornamental cycads as well.
Great, yes.
Yeah.
And there's a question, is there a source I can use to find what butterflies are common in my area? And J.D. Smith directed Molly to NABA chapters have lists for their areas.
Yes, that is correct. And as well as checking out iNaturalist or the recent sightings for NABA or for eButterfly. So you can look at your particular part of Florida or part of the country, um, and look at what kinds of sightings people have been seeing. And uh, butterflying, as I like to call it, is a becoming more and more popular, kind of similar to birding. So when people see different butterflies, when they go on hikes or go out to do butterfly photography, they post all the different species that they see. So it's a pretty reliable way to gauge what kind of butterflies are near you.
Yes, I check out iNaturalist a lot to see what plants should I go look at. Oh, did somebody see a cool butterfly I should go have a look at? So I hope
Exactly.
more people would use it and get more in touch with what's flying and blooming in their area.
Hmm. Yep, it's a great way to share information like that.
Lots of comments, wonderful program. Lots of kudos to you, Andee.
Thank you, everyone.
And one final question, it looks like Kathy asks, is it still safe to use neem as a pesticide on your garden for butterflies?
I know that neem is overall more natural and safer alternative for a general pest control in a garden. I don't have a lot of personal experience with it, um, but it is, you know, probably not something that I'd use on a butterfly host plant. I would probably just, if you have issues with um, other pests, especially if they're not native on a butterfly host plant, I would try just manual removal if you can, as the, the first try anyway. And there's always everybody has their local offices for the extension service out of the University of Florida. So they're a really great place to go if you have any questions about plant pests or plant diseases.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you so much, Andee, and thank you to everyone for joining us on our Lunch and Learn. One last ask, if you could hit the like button and subscribe. We have most of our viewers are not subscribers, and I have all those statistics. I look at them, so I know if you're watching, you're not a subscriber. Okay. And also make sure to become a member if you're not a member. So with that, I think we're good. And I hope you have a great weekend, Andee. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for watching.